All right, hey everyone. Today I'll be talking about the importance of the multiple mini interview, which is the new aspect of interviewing that medical schools are taking on. And as a medical applicant right now myself, it's something that actually is a pretty drastic change, and it's important to understand the basics. So today I'm going to be going over the importance, first of all, of the interview. Why is it important in the first place? Because the interview is a very essential aspect of the medical school application process. The second part I'll be going over is the brief history behind interviews and why some schools have opted to change to the multiple mini interview format. The third thing will be the format of the MMI. It's also the multiple mini interview is often abbreviated the MMI. I'll be going over the format of it. I won't go too in depth because that's going to be a video on its own, but I'll go over the brief format. And the last thing is the schools that are currently using the MMI. And right now I'm going to be biased, so a lot of these schools are going to be Californian schools, and particularly UCs because I'm a Californian. But that's just an overview, so let's go ahead and get started. So why is the interview important? Interview importance. Why is it important? Well, it's important because, first of all, if you look at the AAMC, which is the American Association of Medical Colleges, they actually made a list of the 12 most important things that often is a determining factor of an applicant getting into med school. And in that list, they had 12 categories of things, and GPA was one of them, MCAT was one of them, interview was one of them. And they listed them as most important to least important. And at the top, the most important thing for someone getting into a medical school was, I guess, interviews, believe it or not. And if you want to link to that survey, I'm actually have it in the description below. And as you can see, it's going to be abbreviated with the number one. So anytime I refer to an article or a publication, I'll usually cite it and it'll be available in the description. So that's actually right there, and you'll see that interview is number one, and cumulative GPA was third, and MCAT was sixth. So it just goes to show you the interview is very, very important. You can go ahead and guess what number two was. Number two, believe it or not, was letters of recommendation, and I think number four, if I'm not mistaken, was medically related community service activities. So why is it? Why is it that the interview is so important, and why is it the letter of recommendation is the second most important? We're often biased because we keep thinking, GP and MCAT are super important, but why is it that these interviews and letters of rec play such a role? And it's right there. It's written on the slide, and it's because most medical students are already pretty good at science. If you're applying to medical school, you genuinely have a passion for science, so usually will end up doing pretty okay in science and GPA and MCATs and stuff. Um, but why does the interview matter? Because the interview shows that you're a person. The letters of rec show that you're a person. They kind of evaluate your characteristics outside of your grades, and that's actually very important because, believe it or not, medicine does have a very big social aspect to it, and interviews are kind of gauging whether or not that social aspect is there for you. And so with that being said, that's why the interview is important. Now I'm going to talk about the two main types of interviews. Most interviews up till until 2001 were traditional interviews. So when you got an interview for a medical school, you would go in, usually meet with someone from the admissions committee, say hi, hello. They'd ask you about life. They'd ask you about your experiences, why you want to go into medicine, etc. That would be the traditional interview, one-on-one, or maybe even two-on-one. You might have more than one. So in recent years, they found that there are actually problems with that approach. First of all, there's a lot of bias, right? There's a sample size of often one, and that's can introduce a lot of bias because let's say you in the traditional interview, you don't really have a lot in common. Maybe you do have a lot in common, and that can actually skew up a lot of the process. Another con of the traditional interview is that it can be open file. And what that means is the interviewer can access your application that you submitted. Again, this opens up for a lot of bias because, let's say the applicant does something that it goes against the interviewer's beliefs, or maybe the interviewer really resonates with the applicant entirely based on their application. Again, that would be unfair, and that opens it up to a lot more bias. And again, here, there are two main things that I cited from Wikipedia. The traditional interview does not predict performance in medical school, and usually they believe that the interview would. And so you can click the link below for where I got that information. And the traditional interview was not also indicative of interpersonal skills, and so that's another reason why they didn't like it. The MMI was implemented in 2001, and it overcomes this bias because, first of all, you're going to have multiple mini interviews, and that's why it's called multiple mini interviews. You have 8 to 10 interviews, and they're much shorter. Instead of the 1 hour, 2 hour traditional interview, you're going to have 8 to 10 multiple mini interviews separated by about 2 minutes, and each in multiple mini interview will be about 8 minutes in length. It's usually closed filed, which means that the interviewers can't see anything from your application, so they can't be biased by your MCAT or GPAs. And believe it or not, it was implemented in 2001, but it has increased to about 20 to 30 medical schools today. A lot more schools are taking it on. The format of the MMI, this is really important. There are about 8 to 10 stations, as I mentioned, and they're each going to be about 10 minutes long. So instead of having one traditional interview that's about 2 hours in length, you now have 8 to 10 mini interviews that are about 8 to 10 minutes in length. So each station usually has two parts to it. So remember, you have 10 stations, right? And within each of those stations, you have two parts to each station. So if you're at that station, the first part's going to be reading a prompt. So there's going to be a prompt on the door, 1 to 2 minutes to kind of analyze it and formulate a response to it. Then you have 8 minutes to go inside and actually answer the prompt in front of an interviewer. And then you'd repeat that for every station. So to give you a visual of this, there's this really cool image I found online, and the source is right there. Some major props to whoever made this because it really makes it easier. So you'll see here there are a bunch of interviewees hanging out outside of door. And so the first 2 minutes that you'll spend are going to be looking at the door, and the door will have a prompt posted on it. It'll be something, a question about it. I'm going to go into the types of questions they ask in another video because that's huge, but there's different types of questions. And so you'll read the prompt for about 2 minutes. If you're lucky, you get a note card to jot down anything you want. And if you don't have a note card, that's fine. You kind of just brainstorm in your head. So you spend those 2 minutes looking, and then once those 2 minutes are up, the next 8 minutes you'll enter and actually go in and answer that question in front of the interviewer. And when you answer that question, you'll hear you'll get 8 minutes, and then at the end of that 8 minutes, you'll hear a beep, and at the end of that beep, you'll have to go to the next station, and you'll repeat, and you'll keep doing that. So that's the general format of the MMI. I guess I'm going to now go into the schools currently using the MMI because that's a big deal. So the whole list is going to be cited under number 3 in the description, so you can go ahead and look at that. But right now I'm going to go into some of the main schools because a lot of them are UCs. I went to a UC, so I think that's pretty important. UC Davis is using it, UCLA is using it, UC Riverside's using it, UCSD is using it, Stanford's using it. So yeah, first of all, California only has around 8 medical schools, at least for the allopathic. And so 5 of those 8 have already started using the MMI. So that just speaks to how big of a change it is. And then some other big schools that are using it include Duke, NYU, and UMich. More and more schools have started using it. And I'm hoping that this kind of shows you the general format of the MMI, where it's used. In the next video, I'm going to go over the specific questions to ask you in the MMI, because the questions they ask are entirely different from the questions that are generally asked in the traditional interview.